Welcome to a place where words touch the soul, where stories breathe life into emotions you thought were long forgotten. Here, we speak of love not as a fairy tale, but as a fire tender, consuming and unforgettable. We explore the glances that linger, the silences that speak louder than words, and the moments that change us forever. This is where deep connection meets raw truth, where every heartbeat tells a story worth remembering. You'll find yourself in these tales, in the longing, in the surrender, in the quiet strength of love that refuses to fade. If you've ever wanted to feel understood, if you've ever wanted to believe in the kind of love that leaves a mark on your soul, you've found your home. It began in a stillness so thick it almost hurt to breathe. The world outside could have been moving in chaos, but here, in this small pocket of space, everything was suspended. The air between us was heavy, dense with something unspoken, something neither of us dared to name aloud. Eyes lingered longer than they should have. Every glance carried its own story, like fragments of confessions we weren't yet ready to voice. My heartbeat was the only sound I truly heard, pounding against my chest as though it knew something I didn't. There was a carefulness to each movement. No rush, no sudden gestures, only the quiet rhythm of presence. It was as though we both feared that breaking the silence might shatter the fragile thread holding us together. He stood close enough that I could feel the faint warmth radiating from him, that almost imperceptible heat that made the space between our bodies feel charged. My hands stayed still at my sides, yet every nerve seemed to anticipate something they'd been waiting for without knowing why. When our eyes met, there was no looking away this time. His gaze wasn't hurry. It searched, it lingered, it reached for something beneath the surface. It was the kind of look that sees more than the shape of a face. It reads every scar, every hesitation, every shadow, and still chooses to stay. My breath caught, not because of fear, but because in that single moment, it felt like all the walls I had spent years building had quietly begun to crumble. It happened so slowly that time itself seemed to bend. His hand moved toward mine, not in a bold, sweeping motion, but like someone approaching something sacred. I could see the faint tremor in his fingers, the almost cautious reverence as if he feared the touch might not be welcomed. And then it happened. Skin met skin. That first touch wasn't loud or grand. It was soft, deliberate, almost fragile, but it carried a weight that knocked the air out of me. It wasn't just physical contact. It was the kind of connection that tells you without words, I see you, I choose you, I am here. In that brief exchange, every mile of distance we had ever felt, whether from silence, fear, or time, collapsed into nothing. It was as if the world had shifted just slightly, but enough to make the impossible suddenly possible. I felt my shoulders drop, a tension I didn't know I had been carrying melting away. There was no need to speak. We both knew that if we did, the spell might break. The stillness was no longer heavy. It was full of the realization that neither of us had been imagining this pull, this quiet longing that had been building in the space between us for so long. His thumb brushed lightly across my knuckles, a movement so small, yet it sent a wave of warmth through me. I didn't think about tomorrow or yesterday. I didn't think about what it meant, what it would change, or whether I was ready. All I knew was that in that moment, nothing else mattered. Every doubt, every guarded thought, every reason to hold back was silenced by the truth in his touch. There was a part of me that wanted to close my eyes and let the moment deepen, but another part wanted to keep them open, to see the look on his face as it unfolded. It wasn't desire alone. It was something far deeper, far steadier. It was the look of someone who had found what they weren't even sure they were looking for until it stood right in front of them. And in that look, I felt safe. I felt seen. I felt like the space between us, once so wide and untouchable, had dissolved completely. That single touch had been enough to change everything, not because it was bold or passionate, but because it was true. It was a promise without words, a vow without ceremony, an anchor without chains. I didn't move away, neither did he. We stood there in that unspoken understanding, knowing the night might fade, knowing life might pull us apart in ways we couldn't yet see, but also knowing that something had been set into motion, something we couldn't undo even if we tried. And maybe that's why I'll never forget it, because sometimes love doesn't arrive with fireworks or grand declarations. Sometimes it arrives in the quiet, in the stillness, in the softest brush of skin against skin, when two people finally stop holding back, and one small touch is enough to shatter every mile of distance they thought was between them. It happened in the quiet hum between words, when the world outside blurred and the air between us turned heavy. For so long, the space had been filled with glances that lingered too long, conversations that circled what neither of us dared to say, and the electric pull of something unspoken but undeniable. Every brush of the hand, every accidental touch, had been an echo of what we were both trying to hold back. When it finally happened, there was no plan, no warning, just the sudden closeness, the slow realization that the distance we had been keeping had vanished. The moment felt both impossibly fast and achingly slow. The warmth of his breath was the only signal before our lips found each other, not timid, but certain, like two currents colliding with a force that had been building for years. It wasn't just a kiss. It was every restrained feeling breaking free, every night spent wondering how it would feel finally answered in a single moment. It was the taste of someone you had known far too well, and yet never in this way. His hand slid to the back of my neck, steady and sure, drawing me closer as if we had both decided that letting go was no longer an option. My body moved without thought, meeting the urgency with equal fire, as though we had been set alight from the inside. Time bent strangely around us. The world fell silent, except for the sound of breaths merging, the soft hum of a world we no longer occupied. In that kiss lived every glance we'd shared across crowded rooms, every accidental brush of fingertips that sent shivers up my spine. It carried the weight of the moments we had walked away when we wanted to stay, the nights I lay awake replaying the curve of his smile, the tilt of his head when he listened, the way his eyes seemed to hold something meant only for me. The kiss deepened, not because we forced it, but because it was inevitable. It had been there all along, waiting, breathing, growing between us like a secret we were both too afraid to touch until now. His lips moved with an unspoken promise, one that said he wasn't just here for this moment, but for all the moments after. My fingers curled into his shirt, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath my palm, and for the first time in a long time, I felt certain of something. It wasn't just passion, it was recognition, like finding a part of yourself you didn't realize you'd been missing until it was placed gently, irrevocably into your hands. The kiss was slow and hungry all at once, carrying the weight of the years we had been apart, even while standing in the same room. It was as if destiny had been cruel enough to make us wait, only to reward us with this, the kind of connection that makes everything before it feel like a rehearsal. When we finally broke apart, it wasn't from lack of wanting, but from the need to look at each other to confirm that this was real. His forehead rested against mine, our breaths still tangled, and in the silence there was an understanding too deep for words. I saw it in his eyes, the same thing that had lived in mine for so long. That kiss didn't just stay in the moment. It burned itself into memory, into the very marrow of who I am. Even now, it's there waiting in the quiet spaces of my mind, replaying with the same force, the same fire, the same undeniable truth. When our lips met, they didn't just touch, they collided with everything we were, everything we had been, and everything we would become. It was the moment longing stopped being longing and became something we could finally hold. It began slowly, like the way a candle warms a room. Not all at once, but enough for the air to change, for the silence to shift into something that felt alive. The night was quiet except for the sound of breathing, steady at first, then caught between moments when the closeness became too much to hold inside. The warmth of skin against skin was not just touch. It was an unspoken language, a conversation of every word never dared to say out loud. It felt ancient, like a memory from before this life, a rhythm carried through generations, as if this moment had been waiting to find its way here all along. Every breath carried weight, not the heaviness of burden, but the kind that comes when something matters so much it steals the strength from the knees. Fingers traced familiar paths they'd never traveled before, discovering what had always been hidden just beneath the surface. It wasn't about desire alone. It was about recognition, the kind that makes two people realize they've been searching for each other long before they knew they were searching at all. Time bent itself around this moment. Hours folded into seconds, seconds stretched into eternity. It was impossible to tell if the night was moving forward or holding still. Every movement was both a beginning and an ending. The air between them was charged, not with haste, but with reverence. Every gesture given as though it might be the last, every touch received as though it was the only truth left in the world. The heartbeat against the chest was the only clock that mattered, and it was steady, sure, and deep enough to anchor the soul. It was not the kind of closeness that rushed to be satisfied. It was the kind that lingered, the kind that allowed silence to speak and stillness to breathe. This was not possession. It was surrender, and in that surrender there was no fear, only the quiet knowing that this moment was beyond choice. It was inevitable. Outside, the world carried on without them. Somewhere, clocks ticked, cars passed, lives continued in their familiar rhythm. But here, nothing else existed. Here, it was only this: the curve of a shoulder, the press of a palm, the way lips found each other as if they had been made for that single, perfect purpose. Here, love was not a thing to be spoken of, but a thing to be lived entirely, without hesitation, without the need for promises, because the moment itself was already enough. Every glance felt like a confession. Every sigh felt like an oath. There was no separation between the heart and the body. They moved as one, felt as one, lived as one. And even as the night deepened, there was a quiet ache in knowing that no matter how tightly this moment was held, it would have to end. But endings did not matter here. What mattered was the truth that, even when the night gave way to dawn, this connection would not fade. It would live in every breath taken after, in every heartbeat that dared to remember. And when the first light touched the edge of the sky, there was no sadness, only the undeniable certainty that this was the night that would never be forgotten. The morning light crept in slowly, touching the edges of the room like it was afraid to disturb the quiet. It poured across the sheets, catching on every fold, wrapping itself around the two shapes tangled together. There was no rush to move, no thought of the world beyond the walls. The only sound was the soft rhythm of breathing, uneven in places, as if each inhale and exhale was learning a new way of existing. Something had shifted in the night, something that no one could name, but was felt in every inch of skin and every unspoken thought. There was no need for words. Words would have been clumsy here. Everything worth saying had already been said without a single syllable. The night had been a language of its own, one of glances that lingered too long, touches that started soft but stayed to memorize, and silence that spoke louder than any confession. In that silence, trust had been built, not the kind that comes with time alone, but the kind that blooms when two souls strip away every defense and meet without armor. The way his eyes looked then, half shadow, half light, was something that would never be forgotten. It wasn't just desire, it was recognition, as if he was seeing not just a body, not just a face, but the entire map of a heart that had been hidden for years. Every unspoken fear, every scar, every hope. He seemed to know them now, and instead of turning away, he moved closer. That closeness was different from anything before. It wasn't a chase. It wasn't a fleeting hunger. It was something steady, rooted, unshaken. Even as the night passed, even as exhaustion settled into limbs, that connection refused to fade. And in the quiet hours before dawn, when the rest of the world slept, it deepened. The first rays of morning painted the room gold. Eyes opened slowly, still heavy with the weight of everything they had shared. They didn't smile at firsts. Miles felt too small for what had been exchanged. Instead, there was a look, a long, searching, quiet look that spoke of understanding. That look said, "I know you now, all of you. And I'm not leaving." The air was warm, but there was a shiver not of cold, but of realization. Something irreversible had happened. The boundary between two separate lives had blurred, and now they existed in the same space, in the same breath. The thought of returning to the way things were felt impossible, like trying to unlearn the taste of water once you've been thirsty for years. Fingers brushed without thought, tracing the lines they had memorized only hours before. No one rushed to fill the silence. No one looked away. This was a moment meant to last, even if time insisted on moving forward. And though the sun climbed higher, though the day outside began, inside this room, the night lingered. There was a strange ache in that stillness, not a sadness, but a sweetness edged with fear. The kind of fear that comes when you realize you've found something rare, something that doesn't come twice in a lifetime. The kind of fear that makes you want to hold on tighter, because letting go would mean returning to a world that suddenly feels less alive without it. It would be easy to pretend it was just the night that made it so powerful. Easy to blame the hour, the mood, the warmth of two bodies in the dark. But deep down, there was a certainty that it wasn't just the night. It was the connection that had been growing long before this morning. A connection that had been patient, waiting for the moment when both hearts would be ready to meet without hesitation. No one moved, no one wanted to break the spell, but eventually there would be words. Words about the day ahead, about what came next. Yet for now, they were suspended in a place where time was gentle and love was louder than any sound. It was in his eyes that the truth lived, the truth that something had shifted forever. The truth that what began last night wasn't ending with the dawn, and though the world outside would keep turning, inside this room, in this moment, there was only the quiet pulse of two hearts that now beat in unison. And nothing, not even time, could take that away. If this touched your heart, stay with us. Subscribe, like, and share, because love like this deserves to be felt by more than just you.